My name is Alain, and this is the story of my life in the Congo. I was born in Bukavu, in the South Kivu province of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, though no one really called it that. We just called it home. Bukavu lies at the edge of Lake Kivu, a beautiful place at first glance. Imagine hills rising out of the water, like the spine of a sleeping dragon, mist swirling between them. From the hills, you could see across to Rwanda. The sun would fall across the lake like fire, and we'd sit at the water's edge, skipping stones and dreaming of distant lands we'd only heard about in whispers. But the Congo isn't just a place. It's a feeling, a weight in your chest, a story whispered with caution. And it has teeth. I was the third of 5 children. My mother was a school teacher. My father, when he was around, worked as a driver. He transported anything and everything: bananas, fuel, passengers, weapons, corpses. In the Congo, your job doesn't define you. Survival does. My earliest memories are not of schoolbooks or toys. They are of drums at night, of mothers whispering to each other with fear in their eyes, of my older brother covering my ears as the gunshots cracked in the hills above our village. We lived in a small compound with a corrugated tin roof. Rain was both a blessing and a curse. It fed our small crops, filled our water drums, but leaked endlessly through the roof. When lightning struck, it sounded like the sky was tearing open. Most days, we were poor but peaceful. I'd fetch water from the stream at dawn, barefoot, balancing the bucket on my head. I knew every step of the path, where the ants swarmed, where the thorn bush leaned, where the snake sometimes coiled in the sun. We ate cassava, beans, and sometimes small fish from the lake. Meat was rare, usually a chicken on a holiday, or a goat for a funeral. And always there was hunger. Not starvation, but the quiet, constant kind. The kind that follows you to bed and wakes you up before dawn. And then there were the whispers. The Mai are near. The Interahamwe have crossed. Avoid the road to Kabare. Whispers like shadows under the door. I was 11 when the war touched me directly. It was a quiet night. The moon hung low and yellow in the sky, like an eye watching from the heavens. We were sleeping, all of us, curled under thin blankets, to the sounds of crickets and frogs singing from the bush. Then came the shouting, men's voices, boots. The door shattered inward. I remember hands grabbing me, dragging me outside. My father yelling, my sister screaming. They were Mai militia, young men with glazed eyes and ragged clothes, smelling of sweat and weed and blood. They took food, radios, and then my older brother Jean-Paul. He didn't cry. He just looked at me, one long look, and then they were gone. We never saw him again. That night, my mother didn't sleep. She knelt in the dirt and prayed until sunrise, her hands trembling, her voice a whisper, and in the distance, the hills burned. The days after Jean-Paul was taken, blurred together like a fever dream. My mother stopped talking for 3 days. My little sister asked if he was coming back. I didn't answer. At 11 years old, I had learned that silence was safer than hope. Neighbors brought what little they could, some food, a used pair of sandals for me. One woman gave my mother a wooden crucifix and said, "Keep praying. God watches us from the mountains." But in the Congo, even God has to hide sometimes. We moved shortly after, on foot, carrying everything we owned in 2 sacks and a plastic basin. My mother didn't say where we were going, only that it was safer. I didn't ask questions. You learn not to when you live in a place where questions can get you killed. We ended up in a church compound that had been turned into a makeshift camp. There were hundreds of families packed into tents, made from plastic tarps and UN-issue blankets. The air smelled like wood smoke, sweat, and something darker. Grief, maybe. There were always flies, always children crying, and always the sound of distant gunfire. There were nights when the rain would pour so hard it sounded like the sky was punishing the earth. The mud would rise above our ankles. Babies slept in puddles. Sometimes they didn't wake up. No one screamed. No one had the strength left to scream. I met a boy named Kazi. He had a scar down the left side of his face and spoke little, but he was fast. He showed me how to steal from the aid convoys without getting caught. Not because we wanted to, because we had to. They brought rice, cooking oil, powdered milk. Not enough for everyone, never enough. So we ran behind the trucks when they stopped. Sometimes we got lucky, sometimes we got beaten. One time, I slipped and fell under the wheels. The truck missed my head by inches. I remember lying in the dirt, gasping and thinking, not about dying, but about what my mother would do without me. Weeks turned into months. One day, Kazi didn't show up. I asked around. No one knew, or no one would say. In the camp, people disappeared often. Taken, killed, or just gone. Like vapor. My mother got sick that winter. Malaria. I sat with her all night, wiping the sweat from her forehead, listening to her whisper prayers between tremors. She said names I didn't recognize. Maybe ancestors, maybe ghosts, maybe both. In Congo, the line between the two is thin. She recovered, barely, but the sickness stayed in her eyes. She moved slower after that, smiled less. But every morning, she still braided my sister's hair and made us wash our feet, even if there was no soap. One day, a man came to the camp. He wore a white shirt and had a camera slung over his shoulder. He wasn't UN. He was Congolese, like us, but from Kinshasa. He said he was a journalist. He spoke softly, like someone who knew that loud voices drew bullets. He asked questions, took notes, filmed. When he saw me watching, he called me over. "You have sharp eyes," he said. "You want to learn how to use this." He handed me the camera. Heavy, cold, real. That's when something changed in me. For the first time, I saw that there was another way to fight. Through stories, through images, through truth. I stayed with him for 2 weeks. He taught me to frame a shot, how to focus, how to hold the camera steady even when your hands shake. We filmed interviews with women who had escaped rebel camps, children with bullet wounds, old men who remembered the days before Mobutu. But also, we filmed joy, a wedding in the camp. A group of boys building a football from rags. A woman singing lullabies as she stirred a pot of beans. That's what he said we needed most, proof that we were still human. Eventually, he left, promised he'd return. I never saw him again, but he left me something behind, a notebook and a message. Tell your story, Alain. The world may not listen, but it must never say it didn't know. I wrote every day after that, on scraps of cardboard, old newspapers, even the backs of UN leaflets. I wrote about the smell of fear, about the sound of silence after a massacre, about the way the sun looked on a calm morning, like nothing had ever happened. When I was 15, I left the camp to look for work. Anything. That's how I ended up in the mines. They told us the mine was safe, that we'd make good money. Lies. Everything in Congo starts with lies. We worked in tunnels so narrow I had to crawl on my belly. The air smelled like rust and sweat, and something rotten. There were no helmets, no lights, just flashlights strapped to our heads with strips of cloth. We dug for cobalt, coltan, and gold, things that people in faraway countries turned into iPhones and Teslas and wedding rings. We got paid in bread and promises. One day the ceiling collapsed. 4 boys died. I remember their names. I always will. You don't forget the people who died breathing the same dust you did. I carried bodies out with my bare hands, my fingernails ripped, my knees raw. I looked down and saw one of the boys, his face crushed, eyes open, and still, we went back the next day. We had to, but I didn't last long. I got sick, lungs full of dust. I started coughing blood. The foreman said I was useless, threw me out with a bag of peanuts and an old shirt. I walked for 2 days back to the camp, fevered, starving. I saw things on that walk I still can't talk about. Women tied to trees, a child sitting beside a body, flies covering both, a rebel roadblock made from skulls. When I made it back, my mother cried. My sister didn't recognize me. I had changed. Something inside me had snapped and reformed into something harder, something colder. But still, I wrote. At 17, I got caught stealing from a soldier's truck. Not food, paper. I needed it to write. They beat me so badly, I couldn't walk for a week. But I never stopped writing. And then by some miracle, someone read one of my stories. An aid worker, I think. He showed it to someone at a university. They offered me a scholarship. Not money, just a chance, a flight, a place to study. I left the Congo the following spring. I remember the airport in Goma, the dust, the heat, my mother's hand shaking as she held mine, my sister crying into my chest. I'll come back, I told them. I swear, and I meant it. The plane took off. I watched the land below me, the endless green, the winding rivers, the blood-soaked soil that had shaped me. I felt no joy, only guilt. I was leaving, but part of me would never be able to leave. I landed in Belgium. Everything was clean, cold, quiet. It felt like another planet. People complained about the Wi-Fi, about the rain, about the trains being late. I nodded, smiled. I didn't tell them that where I came from, rain could kill. That I had walked barefoot past bodies to get water. That my brother had been taken in the night and my best friend buried under stone. I wrote it instead. That's how I coped. I wrote. My stories spread. Some were published, some translated, some ignored. But I kept going. Now, years later, I live in a small apartment. I have a bed, a desk, a stack of notebooks. But at night, I still dream of Congo, of the birds in the jungle, the laughter of children, the scream of a mother who just lost her son. The war didn't end. It just got quieter, more complex, and the world moved on. But we didn't. We couldn't. The Congo still bleeds. Every time someone holds a phone, drives an electric car, puts on a gold necklace, I wonder if they know, if they care. Some do, most don't. But I tell them anyway, because silence is the weapon they count on. And my voice, our voice, is the only thing they haven't taken. I used to think I could forget, that if I stayed busy, if I studied hard enough, if I walked fast and smiled in the streets of my new life, the ghosts would stay behind. But trauma doesn't live in the past. It waits, quiet, patient, and then one sound, a firecracker, a slammed door, a siren pulls you back into the pit. It's strange. living in a place where no one knows where you're from, where people hear Congo and think of music or gorillas, or maybe nothing at all. Some of them ask if I've been on safari, if we have Wi-Fi, if I speak African. I don't blame them. The world is noisy. Our pain is not trending. And no one likes to think that their phones are powered by our dead. But there are moments, brief, precious moments, when someone looks me in the eyes and says, "I didn't know. Tell me more." And so I do. I tell them about the boy who traded his shoes for antibiotics and still died. About the mother who carried her daughter 50 kilometers to reach a hospital only to find it had no medicine. About the priest who buried 30 people in one day, marked only by stones because there weren't enough coffins. But I also tell them about the beauty, because it's important. The world needs to know that we are not just a graveyard. I tell them about Lake Tanganyika, where the water is so clear you can see the fish swimming beneath your feet. I tell them about the music, the drums, the voices, the dances that can turn any tragedy into something holy. I tell them about my sister's smile, about how she learned to braid hair by practicing on corn husks. One winter evening in Brussels, I stood on a stage and read my story aloud. The room was quiet. You could hear the chairs creaking, people shifting in their seats. And when I finished, someone in the back stood and asked, "Do you think Congo will ever heal?" I didn't answer right away, because healing isn't a straight line. It's a scar that keeps opening, a wound that closes just enough to let you breathe before the knife returns. But still, I said yes, because if I didn't believe in that, I wouldn't still be standing. The truth is, we are already healing, in whispers, in poems, in photos taken with borrowed cameras, in classrooms made from tarps, in small acts of defiance, like planting mango trees in places where landmines once slept. I went back once. It had been 6 years since I left. The moment I stepped off the plane in Goma, the smell hit me. Dust, smoke, and something warm and ancient. The air felt heavier, like it remembered me. I took a motorbike through the hills, past villages I had only seen in nightmares. Some were still there, some were gone, just ash and memory. I stopped at the camp where I'd lived as a boy. Most of the tents had been replaced with shacks, the same old faces, a few new ones. My mother had died the year before, malaria again, no medicine. My sister lived with an aunt now. She ran to me when she saw me, her hair longer, her face older, but her eyes were still home. We talked all night, sitting on the same mats we used to sleep on. She told me stories of the years I'd missed. Some were small, school crushes, new babies, old men dying peacefully. Others were darker. New militias had moved into the area, more displacement, more violence. The names had changed, but the pain had not. Before I left, I gave her my old camera. The one the journalist had handed me all those years ago. It barely worked anymore, but she smiled like I'd given her the moon. "Now, you tell the story," I said, and she nodded. Because that's how we fight. With memory, with truth, with stubborn, ridiculous hope. I think about Jean-Paul often. I imagine what he might look like now. Maybe taller than me, maybe married, maybe gone, bones lost somewhere in the jungle. I'll never know. But he lives in my words, in every sentence I write, in every student who reads my essays, in every conversation that begins with, "I didn't know." I used to write because I was angry, because I was broken. Now I write because I believe, we deserve better. Because the world needs to remember that behind every statistic is a voice, a name, a story. I'm not a hero. I'm not special. I just survived. And that in the Congo is no small thing. I walk through life knowing that my story is not unique. There are millions more like me. Some still trapped in the cycle, some buried, some fighting, some dreaming. You may never see them, but they exist, and they matter. I tell my students, when you see a country like the DRC on the news, don't look away, don't shrug, don't say, that's just how it is over there, because it's not. This isn't destiny. It's not genetics. It's politics, greed, corruption, exploitation, centuries of colonial theft, followed by decades of abandonment, then weaponized aid, then silence. But we are not silent anymore. We are singing, even with cracked voices, even with missing teeth, even with blood in our mouths. We are still singing. I wrote this for my brother, for my mother, for Kazi, for Joseph in the mine, for the girl who braided dolls made of sticks and string, for the preacher who never gave up, for the teacher who taught me that words are more powerful than bullets. And I wrote it for you. Because now you know, you don't get to say you didn't. So the next time you unlock your phone, think of the hands that pulled the minerals from the earth. Think of the boy in the tunnel, the woman carrying water, the child running barefoot through the ashes. And ask yourself, what is your silence worth? Because silence has a price, and we've been paying it for far too long. But not anymore. We often forget how precious our lives really are. Most of us are luckier than we realize. Our everyday worries and complaints are nothing compared to what some people have endured and are still enduring right now. Be grateful for the smallest things and don't forget Alain's story. This is Raw Historian. If you enjoyed, please make sure to like and subscribe for more history content. Thank you.